In 530 AD, on the hard, dry plain outside Dara, the Roman Empire survived because one young general looked at open ground and refused to accept what it meant. That is where this story begins. Not with glory, not with marble halls or imperial ceremony. With dust, with arithmetic, with a brutal fact staring every officer in the face. 25,000 Romans against 50,000 Persians, on flat Mesopotamian terrain, against the finest cavalry in the east, against the Sasanian Empire, the one rival state that still met Rome as an equal, and increasingly looked like the stronger of the two. In any honest reading of the battlefield, the Romans were already half dead. The Persians had the numbers, they had the cavalry, they had the momentum, they had the confidence of an empire that had watched Roman commanders repeat the same tired mistakes again and again. And yet, by the end of that battle, the Persian elite lay piled inside a ditch, their cavalry crushed by their own momentum. Their pride broken by a man barely old enough to be trusted with a frontier command. His name was Flavius Belisarius, and the weapon that saved the East was not a miracle, not a super weapon, not some secret Roman legion reborn from the age of Caesar. It was earth-cut and shaped by intelligence. To understand why Dara mattered so much, we need to start with the condition of the empire. Belisarius was trying to save. The Roman world of the 6th century was no longer the old universal Rome of legend. The Western Empire had already fallen. Italy, Spain, North Africa. Gaul lost broken or ruled by others. What remained was the East centered on Constantinople, rich, sophisticated, still dazzling in wealth, law, and imperial ritual, but increasingly aware that survival came before restoration. And yet, the man ruling it, Justinian, was not built for modest survival. He dreamed in imperial scale. He wanted not just stability, but recovery. Not just endurance, but reconquest. He wanted the Roman name to mean something larger again. The problem was simple. Before the empire could look west, it had to stop bleeding in the east. Because beyond the frontier stood Persia, ancient, disciplined, politically mature, and convinced that Rome's best days were behind it. The transcript is right to frame the Persian threat not as a random raid, but as a civilizational pressure point. The Sasanian Empire under Kavad I had every reason to feel superior. Roman morale in the east had been damaged by repeated setbacks. Persian commanders had studied Roman habits long enough to know their predictability. The cavalry arm of Persia, especially the armored cataphracts, represented exactly the kind of battlefield challenge that a diminished Roman field army least wanted to face on open terrain. These were not light raiders harassing at the edges. They were full-weight shock cavalry men and horses armored in steel, built to break formations by momentum and terror. Against them, Roman infantry on a flat plain looked like meat waiting to be trampled. Everyone knew it. Belisarius knew it most of all. That is why his first real act at Dara matters so much. He refused to lie to himself. Lesser commanders comfort themselves with speeches, tradition, or the memory of old victories. Belisarius looked at the battlefield and understood immediately that if he fought the Persians on the terms they wanted, he would not lose a battle. He would stage an execution. His officers begged retreat behind the city walls. That would have been reasonable. even prudent. But Belisarius also understood something else. If he hid, he surrendered the moral and strategic initiative. The Persians would dictate the campaign. Roman fear would be confirmed. Dara might survive for the moment, but the eastern frontier would remain psychologically broken. So he chose a harder path. If the land would not protect him, he would redesign the land. He told his men to dig. That sounds simple. It was not. The ditch at Dara was one of the great acts of battlefield design in late antiquity, because it was never meant to be a passive defense. It was a trap disguised as weakness. Belisarius had a main trench dug across his line, but he left the center strangely open enough to look unfinished, vulnerable enough to tempt a commander already inclined to read Roman caution as Roman fear. Then on either side of that central opening, he had additional ditches cut inward at angles like claws or jaws beginning to close. Hidden near those angled lines and at their ends were some of his best mobile troops, Huns, Heruls, and other elite mounted mercenary elements who could move fast, shoot hard, and strike at exactly the right second. Belisarius was not building a wall. He was building an argument. He was telling the Persians, "This is the weak point. Come here, finish me." And he was trusting that their arrogance would do the rest. That arrogance had a face. Perozes, the Persian commander, approached the field already certain he was about to humiliate a child. This is not a minor detail. It is the emotional center of the battle. Belisarius was young, promoted high, lightly proven, and standing in apparent defensiveness before a stronger foe. To a veteran Persian commander steeped in confidence and contempt for Roman softness, the ditch looked like an admission of inferiority. He mocked it. He sent his famous message demanding that his bath be prepared in the city of Dara by afternoon. That message should remain in the story because it captures everything Belisarius needed. The Persians were not just stronger. They were already interpreting the battle incorrectly, which meant their confidence could be used against them. The first day passed in tension rather than collision. Duels were fought, champions were sent. Both armies stared across the dust under the punishing sun, waiting for nerve to crack. The Persians expected Roman morale to bend first. It did not. Belisarius held his line, said little, and let the shape of the field do its invisible work on the enemy's imagination. Because traps do not work only through terrain. They work by making the target choose the wrong meaning. The Persians looked at the Roman position and saw fear. Belisarius looked at the same field and saw a machine waiting to close. When the real fighting began on the second day, Perozes did not throw everything directly into the suspicious center. He was arrogant, but not witless. He opened by testing the Roman left flank, sending infantry, cavalry, and archers to press it hard and see if the Roman line would fracture under real pressure. This phase matters because it proves Dara was not won by one trick alone. The Roman line bent, men screamed, arrows darkened the air. If that flank broke, the whole careful design could still collapse into encirclement. Belisarius watched in cold control. Then he made the first move that began unmaking Persian certainty from the opposite side. Far on the Roman right, 300 Hun horsemen suddenly emerged and began riding parallel to the Persian line, firing their composite bows, with startling speed and insolent precision. This was not a grand assault. It was bait. Belisarius was not trying to destroy the Persian flank with 300 men. He was trying to insult it, irritate it, provoke it into forgetting the geometry of the field. He succeeded. Perozes, furious that so small a mounted contingent would dare harass his forces in plain sight, sent around 3,000 elite cavalry to crush them. Here, the battle begins sliding out of Persian control. The Huns turned and fled, not in panic, but in a measured, calculated retreat. The Persians pursued, certain that prey had finally been revealed. And then they crossed the angled edge of the hidden ditch system. What happened next is one of the most brutal reversals in the entire campaign. From the earth itself, concealed troops burst upward. Heavy mercenary infantry and supporting forces struck the Persian flank. The retreating Huns wheeled, turned, and shot point-blank into the confused cavalry mass. Suddenly, the elite Persian horse found itself hit from front and side. In a constricted zone, it had not properly read. The charge, which would have been terrifying in open momentum, now became clumsy and self-destructive. Horses crashed. Riders fell. Armor that protected in motion became a burden in chaos. Men were dragged from saddles and butchered. In perhaps 15 minutes, Belisarius had erased roughly 3,000 of Persia's best cavalry. More than the bodies, it was the manner of the destruction that mattered. The Persian commander had just watched his elite troops die, not by superior force, but by superior design. At that point, the battle stopped being a contest of plans and became a contest between one man's discipline and another man's rage. Perozes had been humiliated in full view of both armies. The trap of the flanks had not merely worked, it had made him look foolish. He answered the way proud commanders often do when public embarrassment strips away patience. He reached for prestige. He turned to the immortals, around 10,000 elite horsemen, the best of the Sasanian army, and ordered them to strike directly through the center, through the opening in Belisarius's ditch line, through the place that still looked weak and unfinished. This was the moment Belisarius had built the entire battlefield to create. The immortals began their advance, first controlled, then faster still until the plain trembled under them. For the Roman infantry holding that center, the sight must have felt apocalyptic. 10,000 armored cavalry coming straight at you is not a tactical diagram. It is an earthquake made of steel. The men in the Roman center knew what the Persians believed, that they were about to be crushed. They tightened shields. They braced for impact. And then the impact never truly came, at least not in the form the Persians imagined. Because by the time the front of the Persian charge entered the opening, it was no longer charging into weakness. It was entering the mouth of a trap. At the exact moment when the immortals were fully committed, too fast to stop and too crowded to maneuver, Belisarius gave the signal. From both sides of the inward angled trenches, Roman infantry rose up in force, not in front of the charge, but on its flanks. That distinction is everything. The Persians had prepared to smash through a weak Roman center. Instead, they were suddenly being hit from both sides at point-blank range. Javelins were hurled into armor from deadly distance. Archers shot horses from protected positions. Slingers smashed helmets and faces with heavy stones. The first Persian ranks died so quickly that their bodies and the bodies of their horses created an instant barrier. The second row crashed into the first, the third into the second. Momentum, which was supposed to guarantee victory, became the engine of their destruction. The immortals had turned themselves into a deadly traffic jam inside a kill corridor they did not even realize existed until it was too late. This is the true genius of Dara. Belisarius did not simply stop cavalry. He forced cavalry to destroy itself by removing the conditions under which cavalry remains effective. Heavy, armored horsemen are terrifying in open acceleration. They are miserable when compressed, unable to advance, unable to retreat, stabbed from both sides their horses, panicking and collapsing beneath them. That is what Belisarius understood. He did not defeat the Persians by matching their strength. He redefined their strength as weakness. By the time the immortals realized what had happened, they were no longer an elite strike force. They were trapped bodies inside a ditch, being methodically butchered by men they had expected to trample. But Belisarius was not satisfied with making the Persians fail. He understood that once morale breaks, the transition from defense to annihilation must come fast. So while the immortals were being crushed in the center, he advanced the Roman infantry, who had held the bait position, now moving not against a functioning charge, but against a stunned and disordered enemy line. Then at the same time, he unleashed his cavalry on both flanks. The Huns and Heruls, who had already performed the first deception, now turned into offensive hammers, slamming into the exposed sides of the Persian main body. This is the moment when the Persian army ceased being an army and became a crowd. Fear moved faster than command. Standards were thrown away. Men fled. Units lost cohesion instantly because what they had just watched in the center could not be explained within the emotional logic of confidence they had carried into battle. The elite had not merely been beaten. They had been humiliated, trapped, and erased by cowardly Roman ditches. Once that image took hold, Persian morale did not bend. It shattered. The remaining immortals trapped in the corridor were massacred almost to the last man. The rest of the army broke and ran hunted out into the desert by Roman cavalry. By the end of the day, perhaps 8,000 Persians or more lay dead, many of them among the elite. Roman losses were far lower. Dara was not just a victory, it was an announcement. Rome, supposedly exhausted and predictable, had produced a commander who could still outthink the East. The news struck Constantinople like revelation. A capital used to hearing about frontier humiliation suddenly had a name to celebrate. Belisarius became overnight the savior of the East. Crowds chanted his name. His victory at Dara gave Justinian something priceless, not just military relief, but hope that his larger imperial dreams might actually be possible. And yet, victory, especially spectacular victory, is never pure inside an imperial court. Because Belisarius had not merely saved the frontier, he had become visible, popular, necessary. For the people, that meant heroism. For Justinian, it meant danger. The emperor was too ambitious and too suspicious not to see the old Roman pattern in front of him, a beloved general, a cheering army and history full of men who had converted military prestige into political force. Beside him, Theodora saw the same problem even more clearly. She was sharper, harder, and less sentimental than her husband about the uses of men. Belisarius to her was not a hero to be adored. He was a weapon, a brilliant weapon, but weapons that become too admired can become threatening. And Persia, meanwhile, was not finished. Kavad I did not interpret Dara as a signal for peace. He interpreted it as an insult that demanded correction. Perozes was humiliated, his prestige broken, his elite dead. But the Sasanian state still had depth, and it still had commanders capable of learning. In 531, a new Persian force under Azarethas crossed the frontier, not toward Dara this time, but through a different line of movement, striking into Syria, choosing plunder, devastation, and economic damage rather than frontal revenge on Belisarius's prepared ground. That shift matters because it shows. The Persian High Command had grasped part of the lesson. They would not let Belisarius choose the field again so easily. Belisarius was sent in pursuit, but now he was hunting Persians, while already carrying a new enemy with him, politics. He had been given too little supply, too little command freedom, and too many observers from the palace men, whose purpose was less to help him win than to ensure he did not win too magnificently. This is one of the great tragic threads of his career. Dara had made him indispensable, but it had also guaranteed that every future mistake would be watched with hungry attention by men who wanted the miracle worker reduced to human size. Eventually, after a grueling pursuit, he cornered the Persians near Callinicum on the Euphrates. There they stood with the river behind them exposed, tired and seemingly vulnerable. Belisarius's instinct told him to wait, contain and force them into surrender or disadvantage. But his own officers and troops, maddened by thirst, pride, and the intoxication of his recent fame, demanded battle. That is where I'll stop part 1, because the next movement is where Belisarius's story turns darker and more human. The disaster at Callinicum, how his own men and court politics forced him into a battle. He knew he should not fight the humiliating return to Constantinople. Theodora's cold decision to keep him alive, and the final pivot into the Nika riot, where the same man who saved Rome from Persia would save Justinian from his own capital by turning the Hippodrome into a slaughterhouse.